joy.
Thank you.
They delivered a challah to me for my birthday because I turned 80.
You're young.
I don't know about that.
Yes. In relationship, yes. And I feel
anything else.
I'm
Thank you.
sorry.
No, thank you.
I'm sorry. You ready to come up? We said, what do you want? Move a chair over here. I was substituting for Doris. I thought I would be late. It took me no time at all. I came down, you know, because there's a mess at Lawrenceville and Shaker. I can't turn left there. That's my pick of the bagels, I turn left there.
I go down.
And so I went down Woodland. It's so much shorter. Good. So I think Jack said she wasn't coming out. There's a lot of
You have it already. Not many. Unless your ear is down to here.
Right. I do have some of those, but anyway, I had to get out and pick bagels.
You know, May 21st, snuck up on us pretty fast.
I know. Tonight I woke up from a dream that I'm going to the museum and I forgot my legs. And so, you know what? I put it on the laptop and it came up on the PowerPoint. I don't have PowerPoint in my
in English?
I would say 90%.
Who's the best? Joe's really interested in learning more how it works because he's doing this thing with small groups through his foundation. And I was telling him that I understand it was a huge success. So who's the best person to have him speak to?
Well, that's the right question. I mean, there are discussions going on about whether it's going to stay in its current spot in the afternoon, might be moving to the morning. I think they're doing some polling of current people.
I think he just wants to know how it operates. So someone who really
You know, I have a good sense about how it operates. He can call me and I can tell him basically what happened. Just exactly whether there are going to be big changes, both in
I don't think he even cares about that. He just thought that it was a very good model.
It's a lovely program. It really is.
Thank you.
Good,
Thank
good,
you.
thanks.
How did you see the Hands of Food
Tonight.
yet? We're going tonight.
Are you? Such a great opera.
It's at 7.
It's at
Some
7.
people think it's at 7:30 and
No, I know it. I know
Yes.
it. Yeah, good.
no, I'm excited.
And next week, I think the Grand Partita, Mozart's Grand Partita, and the Berg Violin Concerto.
I don't know that. Is
It's
it
an
pretty
age-
modern,
So
pretty
it's-
wild?
It's a Schubert, and he's a student of Schubert.
Yeah.
But he combines atonal and tonality. It's a powerful
Really?
piece of music.
I'm going to be in Washington.
Oh, are you? Okay. Yeah. It's
But-
something to pick up and
Right.
listen to.
Yeah,
though.
but I've gotten Joe. I mean, he likes classical. We both love Bach. He's going to Mozart with me.
Good. Good morning. Shabbat shalom to everybody. So great to see everybody. Let me thank those who participated in the bagel adventure. Jean Dreifert for sponsoring the bagels. And Eric Shaw, thank you, Eric, for sponsoring live stream. And Candy picked up today. Thank you so much. And welcome also to live streamers. Before we launch into our topic, I want to thank Vivian and Malcolm Hinnock for leading Torah Study last week. I'm sure you could easily see how much thought and devotion went into their preparation, and it's always gratifying to me to know that Torah Study's in good hands when I ask somebody to take over. So thank you very much for your hard work, and I think those of us who lead discussions and therefore prepare for them know that the best way to learn something is to assign yourself the obligation of teaching it. And it's at that point then that the panic sets in. What did I do to myself?
Yes.
But when you have to present something, your learning has to be a little more systematic. You have to ask yourself questions along the way. What else can I do to clarify this, or am I going in a good direction? So that's how I've always felt about my own learning, that I'll assign myself a topic, and then I have to learn something about it. So this is good. Okay, our blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We praise you, Lord, our God, sovereign of the universe, who sanctifies us through God's commandments and joining upon us the obligation to immerse ourselves in words of Torah. Amen. Okay, so we are working on the land of Israel in the Bible. Before we got to this topic, although I've been there before, so it wasn't a surprise to me, but I'm sure it's a surprise to you to recognize how varied the views, the consideration of the land of Israel is in the Torah. I mean, we might think of it, it's the land of our ancestors. They lived on it. They did what they did. They were exiled from it. They came back, and that's about the history of the land. A place, one might call it a receptacle for the life of the people on the land. But as you can see, as we began to look last week, and we'll continue, or 2 weeks ago, and we'll continue, there are nuanced views of the land of Israel, its function, its purpose, its status. So let's just quickly review the very first thing said to Abraham, and therefore the first ancestor of the Hebrews. That's how they're called in the book of Genesis. The Israelites is how they're called beginning from Exodus and all the way to near the end, when they're called Judeans, because that is the sole surviving tribe as they return from the Babylonian exile. I think for ease we could say that Abraham is the first Jew, but I think that would be somewhat misleading. He's certainly the first in this line, but there is no Judaism yet until much later in the biblical period, although antecedents obviously exist. So it's interesting, I think even provocative, that the very first thing that God says to Abraham, the first Jew, the beginning of our enterprise, is go to the land that I will show you. So land is on the thinking of the people right from the start. And Abraham goes. Now he's willing to engage in an adventure. The location, the destination of which he is not certain. He knows he's going to the land, but exactly where, what will he encounter there? And he gets there and he creates an altar for God. So there is a divine gesture from God to Abraham, and there's a human gesture back from Abraham to God. I don't want to go so far as to call this covenantal, but it's kind of an incipient covenant which involves both parties to one another. And then as we continued looking on, we noticed that the land can be understood in a variety of ways. So we looked at the land as haven, as a place of rest, as a place where the difficult, torturous trek through the wilderness finally ends where the people find rest in the land. And that word rest is actually used after the conquest of the land by Joshua. He gathers the tribes, he apportions the land to each of them, and then he gives a kind of summary of the history so far. And the people then go to their territories. And the book of Joshua suggests that this is the grand climax of the arc that begins with Abraham. There is peace, the conquest is completed. All we have to do is move to the next book, the book of Judges, to recognize that it wasn't nearly what the book of Joshua thought it was. There are still Canaanites in the land, and there are struggles, one after another, in the book of Joshua, so that there is a kind of culmination, and then that peacefulness is taken away. Nevertheless, the land is called a haven for the people. And if we're thinking about the course of the relationship between the Jewish people and the land of Israel, which obviously continues to this very day, even though the idea of haven was not fully realized or in any durable way, nevertheless, it becomes understood to be a place of haven. And when the Zionists, the early Zionists, were looking for refuge from anti-Semitism, from the pogroms, from the falling apart of the health of the community in Eastern Europe, the idea of the land of Israel as haven still persisted as an idea, or as we might say, as a possibility, or put it differently, as a possibility which was realized in the Bible temporarily, and therefore could be realized again. So the notion of haven is a very important idea in the Bible and continues to resonate. We also notice that the land can be seen as a homeland. That is a place where a people can live a normal life with their own institutions, with their own ideas, with their own sense of history. And the key passage there is Deuteronomy 26. A wandering Aramean was my father. He went down into Egypt and so on. The very passage from which the whole Maggid section of the Haggadah, the story section, emerges. But there we see a people living its own full life. So, haven and homeland. We want to move to the next concept, and that is the land of Israel as holy. So let's take a look here at, let's see, what do we want to do? Leviticus 25. And I want to suggest that holiness, the holiness of the land, can be understood in two ways. One, that the land is inherently holy, and the other is that the land is instrumentally holy. In other words, the land is holy in and of itself, especially in its relationship to God, but also the land can be an instrument for creating holiness in the land. So, Leviticus 25, verse 18. You shall observe my laws and faithfully keep my rules, that you may live upon the land in security. The land shall yield its fruit, and you shall eat your fill, and you shall live upon it in security. And should you ask, what are we to eat in the 7th year, if we may neither sow nor gather our crops? The whole idea of the 7-year cycle, the Shemitah. I will ordain my blessing for you in the 6th year, so that it shall yield a crop sufficient for 3 years. Notice that God has a direct connection to the land, and that God can command the land to, as it were, act in a certain way. So this character captures the notion of holiness of the land, because God, God's self, has a connection to it directly. When you sow in the 8th year, you will still be eating the old grain of that crop, and you will be eating the old until the 9th, until its crop comes in. But the land must not be sold beyond reclaim, for the land is mine. Okay? So what this suggests, and perhaps you'll disagree with this, is that according to the biblical narrative, at a certain point, the people arrive in the land and build a life there. But because the land is God's, the people are coming to a land that already has a relationship to the divine. They're coming to a holy land which is not made holy by their actions, but which itself is already has a special relationship to God. Now that doesn't mean that other lands, in other words, it would be an invalid inference to say, since the land of Israel has an intrinsic connection to God, other lands don't. That would be an invalid inference. But it certainly makes the claim that this is a special land. There might be other lands similar to it, which has a status of holiness even before they come there. and even before they engage with the land. Maya?
If I'm not mistaken, till today, if you have an apartment or a house in Israel, you rent the land. It doesn't belong to you.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Okay, very good. So Maya is making the, I'm trying to remember to repeat the questions. Maya is making the point that even today, if you rent or maybe even buy, you're not, by buying the land, which has to be in quotes, you're not purchasing the land as your own. You're living on the land that has a prior and ongoing owner, and that is God. So we can only be landholders. We can only be rentors. I did not know that, but that does carry on that idea. Stuart?
It's also the case in Mexico.
Hold on. Stuart?
In England, traditionally, the king owns the entire land,
Good.
and you rent it for a period of up to 99 years
Yeah, that's a very good point. Where is this?
in England.
In England. I wonder if that's a more pervasive factor. Yeah. Nita?
It's also the rule in Mexico. You buy the place, but it's not your land.
Okay, very good. I did not know these things. Scott?
Does that preclude letting it to someone else?
This I don't know. You know, I think it's also the Muslim idea of Dar al-Islam, which is the regions owned by Islam. And their idea is that once the land is owned by Muslims, if it should fall into other hands, it is nevertheless a part of the lands of Islam, which have temporarily been alienated from them, but which belong to them and must be recovered. To the degree that I have that correct, it's another very powerful factor in the whole dynamic of the Middle East. I mean, if Islam is going to fully, completely, irrevocably accept the land of Israel as the home of the Jews, then it's going to have to give up or put aside that concept, because they have to give up that we're going to recover it again one day. Okay, so that's the idea of the land inherently holy. And as we've said, and I think that those are wonderful and important comments, other nations, other peoples have felt the same way about their land. What I'd like to do is turn briefly to a very important theoretician of Zionism, who has an interesting extension of this idea of the inherent holiness of the land. And this is Aleph Dalet Gordon, Aaron David Gordon, who at a relatively late age migrated to the land of Israel because he believed that it's only through labor that we can come to possess a certain territory. So he came to Israel, he worked on a couple of farms, kibbutzim, finally ended up at Degania in northern Israel, which is one of the early kibbutzim. So I'm going to read to you from his essay, People and Labor, which was written in 1911. So right in the middle of what's known as the second Aliyah, the second wave of immigration. The Jewish people, he says, has been completely cut off from nature and imprisoned within city walls these 2,000 years. We have become accustomed to every form of life except to a life of labor. Labor done at our own behest and for its own sake. It will require the greatest effort of will for such a people to become normal again. So Gordon here is talking about the abnormality of the exile. And for him, what made life abnormal for Jews in the exile is that we didn't live by our own labors, and he's going to define this a little more clearly in a minute. But normalcy has now to do with a return to manual labor. We lack the principal ingredient for national life. So labor is also manual labor is something, according to him, we haven't done for millennia. But if we're going to recreate the people of Israel, create a nation for ourselves, labor becomes its foundation. Notice there were other Zionist views. I mean, one view is we create a high culture, Hebrew-based culture, an indigenous culture, and therefore become a particular people in a particular place. Or a political Zionism. We become independent by creating a nation state. Nation is crucial. Gordon is suggesting it's labor. We lack the habit of labor, not labor performed out of external compulsion, but labor to which one is attached in a natural and organic way. This kind of labor binds a people to its soil. Okay? So now he's pointing to farming. And notice he uses the pronoun its, binds a people to its soil. Or, as we might extend it, binds a particular people to a particular piece of property. And the assumption here is there is a kind of organic connection. By organic, I mean we don't relate to the land. Any land we go to, we can plant a garden. And we can reap the produce from that garden. And therefore, we have a relationship to that soil. Gordon would say that is a contingent relationship. It's dependent on particular acts at particular times. The relationship is made, not inherited. For him, there is an inherent connection between the Jewish people and the land of Israel. And we're not going to be normal until we reestablish, in fact, what in principle has been the case all the while. Notice that Gordon, this is why I'm reading Gordon just after we talked about the intrinsic holiness of the land of Israel in the Bible. The inherent holiness of the land of Israel for the biblical passage is from the top down, from God down. God has an inherent relationship to the land, and therefore when we come to the land, we participate in that relationship. Gordon also thinks there's an intrinsic relationship between the people and the land, but it's not from God down, it's from the land up. So this is what I might call a mysticism of the land. The land has a personality, the land knows what it wants, and the land is, I'm just extending this maybe too far, the land, it does not feel complete until its people comes back to that piece of property and begins to till the soil. Neither the land nor the people is complete until that happens. So you see, Gordon is working with this biblical idea of the holiness of the land, except he has secularized it. It's not dependent on God anymore. And this is a response to the growing secularism of the Zionist movement. Second Aliyah was socialist, was secular, even though religious Jews were always there, and Mizrahi religious parties, as we know. So Gordon, it's so interesting, Gordon is utilizing an ancient concept but turning it upside down. This kind of labor binds a people to its soil and to its national culture. People, soil, culture. Now, if you take a Zionist theoretician like Achad Ha'am, Asher Ginsburg, Achad Ha'am was his pen name, which means one of the people, which is ironic because of all the theoreticians of Zionism, he was the most elitist, but he called himself one of the people. For Achad Ha'am, national culture is built from the elite down. You create Hebrew poetry and Hebrew and philosophy written in Hebrew. And therefore, it's the literati who create the culture. This is also kind of a top-down. It's not God down, it's the elite down. For Gordon, culture is not going to be authentic unless it's built from the ground up. And he means ground literally. I'm going to read that sentence again. This kind of labor binds a people to its soil and to its national culture, which in turn is an outgrowth of the people's soil and the people's labor. Culture is an outgrowth of the primary relationship between the people and its land. Or to put it differently, a culture of a people can't be authentic unless it's based on the particular relationship to labor and to the tilling of the soil. Now, it is true that every people has many individuals who shun physical labor and try to live off the work of others. But a normal people is like a living organism which performs its various functions naturally. And labor is one of its basic and organic functions. A normal people invariably contains a large majority of individuals for whom labor is second nature. But we Jews are different. We have developed an attitude of looking down on manual labor, so that even those who are engaged in it work out of mere compulsion, and always with the hope of eventually escaping to, in quotes, a better life. We must not deceive ourselves in this regard, nor shut our eyes to our grave deficiencies, not merely as individuals, but as a people. We are, in a word, an abnormal people. The well-known Talmudic saying that when the Jews do God's will, their labor is done for them by others, is characteristic of our attitude. This saying is significant. It demonstrates how far this attitude has become an instinctive feeling with us, a second nature. Who among us thinks about this problem? Who is sensitive to it? We have no labor, and yet we are not aware that anything is missing. We take no notice of it, even when we talk of our national rebirth. Labor is not only the force which binds a person to the soil, and by which possession of the soil is acquired, it is also the basic energy for the creation of a national culture. This is an extraordinary sentence. Let's go back to it. Labor is not only the force which binds man to its soil. In other words, how do you possess a land? How do you come to say that this land is ours? Not by creating a state, not by writing poetry in Hebrew. You come to possess a land through getting the dirt under your fingernails. Labor is not only the force which binds man to the soil, and by which possession of the soil is acquired. It is also the basic energy for the creation of a national culture. Achad Ha'am was wrong. Culture has to be created from the ground up. This is what we do not have, but we are not aware of missing it. And you can see that this is really a powerful form of Zionism. I might even call it a materialist theory of Zionism, unless you associate yourself deeply with the material realities of the land, you're still alien on it, even though you live there. So if part of the goal of Zionism is to create a connection between the Jewish people and Israel in reality, Gordon has a very powerful way, and it's a deeply secular one, isn't it? I think it's got great power. Okay, so Aleph Dalet Gordon. I think it's fascinating, at least to me, that it's natural to read Leviticus 25, which talks about God's inherent connection to the land, and then move to a secular Zionist like Gordon, the structure of whose argument is exactly the same. In a way, both are triads. The triangle is like this: people, land, God. That's Leviticus. For Gordon, it's people, land, soil. The soil is the catalyst for the creation of a special relationship. He turns the triangle upside down. The base is still the same: people, land, God, people, land, soil. Okay, so let's look now at another idea about the holiness of the soil, and that is to look at the land as instrumentally holy. So for this, let's look also at Leviticus 25, but start at the beginning here. The Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai. Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I assign you, the land shall observe a Sabbath of the Lord. 6 years you may sow your field, and 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather in its yield. But in the 7th year the land shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, a Sabbath of the Lord. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap the aftergrowth of your harvest or gather the grapes of your untrimmed vines. It shall be a year of complete rest for the land. Now notice here that the people have a role in creating the holiness of the land in the 7th year. They shall refrain from plowing and planting and reaping, so that Leviticus 25 at the beginning combines the inherent holiness of the land. This is a land where this process will work, but it also makes the land an instrumental holiness in the sense that the people themselves have to enact the regimen of the 7th year. So the inherent holiness of the land lays the foundation for its instrumental holiness. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 6. And this is the instruction, the laws and the rules that the Lord your God has commanded me to impart to you, to be observed in the land that you are about to cross into and occupy, so that, see, the so that phrase is doing this becomes a vehicle for a consequence. Okay, let's start at the beginning. And this is the instruction, the laws and the rules that the Lord your God has commanded me to impart to you, to be observed in the land that you are about to cross into and occupy, so that you, your children, and your children's children may revere the Lord your God and follow as long as you live all his laws and commandments that I enjoin upon you, to the end, that is, with the result that you may long endure. So that if you act in a certain way on the land, there will be a consequence that is salutary. The land here becomes a vehicle if you treat your life on the land in a certain way for enduring. Obey, O Israel, willingly and faithfully, that it may go well with you and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has spoken to you. So you can see that the land here, aside from being a haven, aside from being a homeland, is also a holy land, and in two senses. Inherently, before you even got there, it had a relationship with God, and therefore is a unique land. But also instrumentally, the holy life that you live on the land, holy life here being defined by keeping the commandments of God. In other words, the holiness is in the covenantal relationship, which, if enacted on the land, will yield great consequences for you. In fact, that you may long endure on the land. This idea that you may live and long endure on the land is what I'd like to call here a Rod Serling moment. It's a Twilight Zone moment. There's portent in the phrase, so that you may long endure. What is not stated is, if you don't do this, then you won't long endure. And the Deuteronomist undoubtedly knows about exile. The current theory about Deuteronomy is that it was written in the north, the northern kingdom, and brought to the south to Judah after the defeat of the northern kingdom by the Assyrians, and then who sent most of the northerners into exile. So Deuteronomy has exile consciousness, and we'll see it directly. And perhaps it's intimated here, so that you may long endure. Margie?
You know, I appreciate what you're saying, but I also think the notion of land being holy is at the same time a dangerous concept, because we know it's holy to, holy to all the Abrahamic religions. So besides your long endure, you'll also long struggle, and you'll endlessly fight, and there'll be suffering and all of that.
Right.
The other side of that
Right.
story.
So that Margie is raising the point about the danger of the concept of holiness, because the concept of holiness absolutizes the principle, doesn't it? I mean, if holiness is your relationship to God, and God wants certain things, then there's a kind of, maybe not inherently exclusionary, but it raises the stakes, doesn't it? If our connection to the land is following the laws of the area, and therefore will be able to thrive there, it has pluralistic possibilities. Others might thrive there as well by following laws, maybe not the laws of the Torah, but some sort of laws. If the function of the land is contingent, then other contingencies may accompany our way of doing it. If it's inherent, then it becomes more exclusionary. I think that's a very good point. Right. That's where this idea, I don't know if we want to get into it, but of the separation of church and state, synagogue and state, we might say, is so important to the possibility of pluralism. Because if you allow the interference, that's a loaded term, of the religion into the matters of state and society, you're asking for trouble, for absolutizing, for intolerance. My way is God's way, and so on. So the separation of church and state is really one of the pillars not only of democracy, but of the possibility of a pluralistic society. And the idea of holiness, if it becomes pervasive, a feature of the state, then danger, then problems. Okay, so let's look here now at the issue of the promise of the land. So for this, I want to continue in Deuteronomy chapter 11. Okay, chapter 11, verse 13. If then, that's a giveaway right there. This is a conditional promise. If then you obey the commandments that I enjoin upon you this day, loving the Lord your God and serving him with all your heart and soul. Notice the viahavta language here. With all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And therefore it's not accidental that this in the traditional prayer book is the second paragraph of the Shema. Okay. The first paragraph of the Shema is non-contingent. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. For no particular consequence, just do it. The second paragraph of the Shema, which uses the language of the first paragraph, introduces contingency. If then you obey the commandments that I enjoin upon you this day, loving the Lord your God and serving him with all your heart and soul, I will grant the rain for your land in season, the early rain and the late. You shall gather in your new grain and wine and oil. I will also provide grass in the fields for your cattle, and thus you shall eat your fill. In other words, the weather is a part of the covenant between God and the people. What happens in the material world should be read as a sign as whether or not you're faithful. So it's not a matter of the material world as independent of the spiritual world. The material world reflects the barometer. It's a barometer for how well you're doing spiritually. If you get a lot of rain, you're doing well. This is a sign that it's true, God is happy with you, and therefore sends rain. Verse 15, I will also provide the grass in the fields for your cattle, and thus you shall eat your fill. Take care not to be lured away to serve other gods and bow to them. For the Lord's anger will flare up against you, and he will shut up the sky so there will be no rain, and the ground will not yield its produce. And soon you will perish from the good land that the Lord is assigning you. In other words, when God promised the land to Abraham, and we'll get to this in a second, the promise was without qualification. Here the promise of the land is deeply qualified. You can live a life on the land as long as you follow the commandments of the Lord. It's contingent upon you. I turn the historical process over to you. I've given you the blueprint. This is how to lead a felicitous life. If you don't do it, you will pay the price. Therefore, in verse 18, impress these my words upon your very heart, bind them as a sign on your hand, and let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. Teach them to your children, more viahavta language, reciting them when you stay at home and when you are away. Notice that the very significant difference between the two paragraphs of the Shema. We're enjoined to do the same things in both. Love God, teach them to your children, bind them as a sign on your hand for frontlets between your eyes. Paragraph 1 makes an absolutist claim. Do it. Do it because you recognize its inherent goodness. Don't do it for the sake of consequences. Paragraph 2 asks the same thing, but on a very different moral foundation. I can't count on you, this paragraph may imply, to do the right thing for its own sake. So do them for the sake of reward. Recognize that if you don't do them, it will lead to punishment. An exile from the land, that is alienation from this land, is the severest consequence that can come from the if-then logic. And here's, just as an aside, what I'd like to say about this. The via hafta's logic is extremely exalted and rare. Do it for its own sake. Do it because you get the point. What's the function of the second paragraph? Here's my view. It's pedagogical. It can't count on our doing the right thing for its own sake. And therefore it says, I'm going to give you an instrumentality by which, because it's a rarefied ideal to do it for its own sake, we all need to know what the consequences might be. So I'm laying a kind of consequentialist view here so that you come to do the right thing. And the rabbis say that if you do the right thing not for its own sake, you will come to do it for its own sake. If you do the right thing for reward or to avoid punishment, you may come through behaving in a certain way, come to see its inherent appropriateness, and therefore not need the inducements of reward or punishment. That's the pedagogical idea here. In other words, let's compromise the ideal because we recognize the realities of human nature. It's very hard to do something for its own sake. But if you hold out a reward, you're likely to get me to begin to behave in a certain way and come to see the value of it for its own sake. Some of you know the story. I'm not going to make it real elaborate, but when my kids were little, one Shabbat afternoon, after lunch, I said to them, let's study some Torah. We tried to do this every week with mixed success. Let's study some Torah. And my kids said, no, we don't want to do it. I said to my younger daughter, I'm going to say to Alyssa, I will raise your allowance if you study Torah. And she said to me, this is horrible for you to do this. And I said to her, but let's see, this is sort of Maimonides' view of this whole thing. Let's see if I can get your sister involved in the process of studying Torah and to see how powerful an experience it is. She will come to see it for its own sake. Maimonides says, even promise, so what are the inducements? And Maimonides has a kind of ladder. First, promise them candy. If that doesn't work, promise them fine clothes. If this doesn't work, tell them we will call you rabbi. As an inducement for studying Torah. And then you'll come to see, perhaps, the inherent value of it. So what's interesting about Deuteronomy 11 is that it compromises its idealism in recognition of the realities of human nature, still with a high aspiration for us human beings. I love it very much. Let's look at Leviticus 18. Nada?
So did it work?
It worked with Alyssa. It didn't work with the others. No, it didn't work with my middle daughter. Yeah, that's true. Good question. And please don't ask any more questions. Okay, where are we? Leviticus 18:24. Do not defile yourselves in any of these ways. Notice Deuteronomy is interested in the commandments. Let's call them the ethical commandments. Leviticus is concerned with purity and defilement, ritual ways of understanding. Do not defile yourselves in any of these ways, for it is by such that the nations that I am casting out before you defiled themselves. So in other words, before the Israelites got into the land, other peoples lived there, but were exiled because they lived a life of defilement, as if the inherent holiness of the land cannot tolerate an impure way of life. Do not defile yourselves in any of these ways, for it is by such that the nations that I am casting out before you defiled themselves. Thus the land became defiled, and I called it to account for its iniquity, and the land spewed out its inhabitants, regurgitated. The land, notice the daring personification here. The land gets sick to its stomach. It's eaten bad things, namely a people that defiles its life. And the land cannot tolerate that and regurgitates. Regurgitate means sent into exile, sent away. But you, verse 26, must keep my laws and my rules, and you must not do any of those abhorrent things, neither the citizen nor the stranger who resides among you. For all those abhorrent things were done by the people who were in the land before you, and the land became defiled. So let not the land spew you out for defiling it, as it spewed out the nation that came before you. Notice this is, again, an illustration of the idea that the land is conditionally promised on the condition that you live a certain kind of life. All who, verse 29, all who do any of those abhorrent things, such persons shall be cut off from their people. You shall keep my charge not to engage in any of the abhorrent practices that were carried on before you, and you shall not defile yourselves through them. I, the Lord, am your God. So this notion of the conditionality of the promise is described both in Deuteronomy and in Leviticus on the basis of a different focus, a different sense of the power of a certain set of commandments. Margie?
That's why I think that second paragraph, more than pedagogy, is guilt-inducing. That the land, because of our sins, we were exiled.
Right.
It's part of the liturgy, I think.
Sure.
We always heard that growing up. And, I was glad the Reform movement dropped that paragraph from the prayer book. But then it conditions whatever's happening, whether it's the Holocaust or exile, it's our fault.
Right.
It's God off of us.
Right. So you're saying that my emphasis on pedagogy misses the seriousness of that logic, that it can lead to exile. Forget about what you've learned. Isn't that your point?
I don't want to dismiss the pedagogy.
Right.
I get that, but I guess I'm thinking that the ultimate consequences are devastating.
Right.
If what happens to you is because you did something wrong.
Right. No, I think that's an important addition. Let's look at, I'm just looking for a passage here that I can't yet find. What I'm thinking about is something way back in the Abraham story where God promises the land to Abraham And I assume that Abraham says, why not now? Because God says to him, you will go down, your people shall go down into Egypt, and there they will live for 400 years. And the question arises, why not now? Why a delay of nearly half a millennium? And the answer here in the text, I think it's in chapter 15, but I can't find it, is the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. In other words, the logic of Leviticus that life on the land remains if you do the right thing, and it doesn't if you do the wrong thing, is the logic for which God doesn't give Abraham the land right away, because the current inhabitants have not yet deserved to be exiled from the land. So the story of Abraham is universalizing this idea of peoples and their land. Gary?
I'd like to just raise a kind of a controversial point here.
Yes.
Since we're talking about the land.
Yes.
Can I direct you to Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 16?
Okay, hold on, let's get there. Deuteronomy 7:16. Okay.
First sentence.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is whether this sentence would support what is currently going on in Israel with regard to Gaza.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay, so let's read it, 7:16. You shall destroy all the peoples that the Lord your God delivers to you, showing them no pity. And you shall not worship their gods, for that would be a snare to you. Okay. That's just one of those devastating passages. Even the devil can quote scripture to his advantage. Look, I want to say two things about that. One is, we can't qualify this sentence away. It stands there as, of course, the Bible is a dangerous book, especially if you're willing to read certain passages in isolation. And look, that's part of the rabbinic midrash. One scholar says the horizon of the rabbinic midrash is the verse. That the rabbis are not looking for, what does Deuteronomy say? What does the Torah say? What does this verse say? And from this verse you can derive interpretations. Okay? Bereshit bara Elohim. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Creatio ex nihilo. Creation from nothing. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. That's the beginning for which there is no antecedent. This is the very beginning. But, as Rashi points out, the grammar of that phrase allows for the following translation. When God began to create the heavens and the earth, at a time t plus sub 1, at the moment that, which allows for time before that moment, which suggests that creation should not be understood as creating matter, but presuming the existence of matter, and creation is the shaping of matter. So that the difference is between creatio ex nihilo, creation from nothing, which means the creation of form and matter, and another translation of that phrase, which allows for a very different understanding. This is just an illustration that the rabbis are not really talking about what does Genesis as a whole mean, but what does this verse mean? And I point that out at some length in order to underline Gary's point. I could say that Deuteronomy 7:16 must be read in its context. we could say this, and there might be power in it. But a method of the rabbis is to take the verse as a unit. And as we know, we can read from the scripture what we feel we need from scripture, right? I think you've got a powerful point. And there are other passages like this which lend support for a pan-Judaism Israel. That Israel has not really achieved its goal until there are only Jews there. Just in the paper this morning was a long piece about the rejection of the whole idea of a Palestinian state, long piece in the New York Times. And one could say, because religious Jews are making this point, not all of them, is that the land belongs to the Jews. So why would we allow a Palestinian state? So the ripple effect of a verse like this is still with us today. And I think we have to acknowledge it. Having done that, let me just try to make a point on the other side. I don't want to be unfair here, but I'm going to make a comparison. So that anti-Semitism, especially in its Christian garb, has a problem with Jews. How far back does that problem go? To the origins of Christianity and before. There is continuity between the ancient Jews and modern Jews. They're both called Jews. We don't have any Canaanites after the destruction of the Second Temple. The Romans came in and built a society so that it's a leap. It's not a leap to say ancient Jews, modern Jews, the same thing. It's a leap to say that the descendants, the people who live, the non-Jews who live on the land of Israel, are the direct descendants of the Canaanites. And if they're not, then the imperative wipe them out doesn't apply. So I think there's a lack of continuity in this, and the rabbis as much as say this. We don't know who they are anymore, and therefore the interdicting of them is no longer operative. Now one could say, that's a stretch, and so on, but there is an impulse in Rabbinic Judaism not to carry this invective forward. I don't know how much cogency that has, but it seems to me there's a difference. Eddie?
Yeah. Amy found the verse we're looking for, Genesis 15:16.
Oh, good. There you go. Thank you.
That way we'll get your fears.
Very good. All right, so since we raised it. Right. So, Genesis 15, let's go back to 13, verse 13. And he said to Avram, know well that your offspring shall be strangers in a land not theirs, and they shall be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years, to which I think that Abraham is now saying to himself, why not now? What's the reason for delaying this for 400 years? But I will execute judgment on the nation they shall serve, that's the Egyptians, and in the end, they shall go free with great wealth. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a ripe old age. And they shall return here in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. So that's an extension of that idea, that not only for the Israelites do they have to behave properly, or the land will regurgitate you. It also applies to non-Israelites. The land does not tolerate deep mischief. Eddie?
And we were recently in Israel, and doesn't flourish as much.
It doesn't flourish as much.
Yeah, it doesn't, the fruit doesn't come forth as much. It just doesn't. Maybe I'm reading into it, but it is what it is.
Okay, so Eddie's making the point here that if you look at the quality, the nature of the land as the Israelis are dealing with it, and contrast it with the nature, the quality of the land in Arab lands, that you find that the Israeli lands are flourishing, they're verdant and full, and the lands of the Arabs are empty, are desert, uncultivated. Here's the problem with that.
No, but I'm talking within the land of Israel.
No, I get it. No, I get it. I think that, we have to recognize, don't we, that each culture has its view of what it means to flourish. And to assume that those peoples whose grass is green, contrasted with those people who have no grass, is the sign of a more advanced and better culture. There is, and I think, Eddie, you even worried about it a little bit, there is a kind of arrogance there, isn't there? After all, we don't know the terms, the nature, the assumptions of the culture of another people. And we can't judge the aspects of that culture by our criteria. If I went to India and listened to their Beethoven, I would say, this isn't Beethoven. This is primitive music. That would be the arrogance of feeling that the assumptions of my culture are the basis for evaluating other people's culture, where it isn't. I think in order to think of it in those terms, we would have to go to those Arab communities, live there a while, come to feel what it means to live there, if it's possible for foreigners even to become that thoroughly domesticated, and only then begin to dare some comparisons. This whole, the anthropologists, Margaret Mead and so on, who went to other cultures, their challenge was to be, I think, what she called a participant observer. You have to be both in and out. But in order to evaluate something, you have to live there and come to feel the power of the terms of that culture in order to begin to feel you can assess it using Western European categories. It's always risky to do that. So I'm reluctant to do so. The Arab culture is as rich, certainly in medieval Arab culture, it's as rich as Jewish or Christian medieval culture. Malcolm?
2 points, Roger. One, at least current history, recent history, provides us other examples of a sense of a people owning a land. So Irish people believe that Ireland is their homeland.
Yeah.
And there are some religious connotations or struggles associated to that, Protestantism versus Catholicism. Indian people, even today, especially today, have a notion of a land and a sense of that is a Hindu nation or should be a Hindu nation.
Right.
So the issue of land and church and state is not exclusive to this notion of Eretz Yisrael.
No, it's very true. Yeah, Malcolm is just saying that this whole question of land ownership, belonging to the land, is ubiquitous. It's worldwide and not just narrowed to what we're talking about. And the whole question of what legitimates a people's possession of a land is a much vexed question. Is it a matter of longevity? We were there from time immemorial. I mean, I think the Anglo-Saxons were there a long time before the Normans conquered it from France. Is it longevity? Is it conquest? Is it some kind of legality? I mean, one of the strong claims about the legitimacy of the State of Israel is that the United Nations enacted, created a law. So it's legal. Is some legitimate institution claiming legality? I think there's no certain answer to this question. Some of it just has to do with power. That's why nation states mostly create armies. And that, is basically why at the time of King Saul and King David, the people began to ask for a king, because a central government can thrive by eliciting taxes, money, treasury, and an army. Because when you live among others, you better be able to protect your borders, because the borders are always problematic. So is it a strong, successful army that legitimizes? It's a problem. I'd like to go on just a little bit here and get to a couple more things. So let's look at Genesis 17, because we've looked at for a bit the contingency of the promise. If you obey, then you will get. Let's look at 17 verses, beginning with verse 1. When Avram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Avram and said to him, I'm El Shaddai. Walk in my ways and be blameless. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I will make you exceedingly numerous. Avram threw himself on his face, and God spoke to him further. As for me, this is my covenant with you. You shall be the father of a multitude of nations, and you shall no longer be called Avram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I make you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fertile and make nations of you, and kings shall come forth from you. I will maintain my covenant between me and you and your offspring to come as an everlasting covenant throughout the ages, to be God to you and to your offspring to come. I assign the land you sojourn in to you and your offspring to come, all the land of Canaan, as an everlasting holding. A brit olam, an everlasting covenant, or holding, achuzat olam. I will be their God. So, conjoined with the idea of the conditional promise of the land, that it depends on the quality of the life that you live, and it's always up for grabs, is this corresponding idea of the unconditional promise. What does unconditional mean? There are no conditions. It's not contingent upon anything else. This is your land forever. So notice the power of those two ideas. On the one hand, the quality of the life that you live has an impact on how things are going to turn out in the short run. You may sin to such a degree that I'm going to have to exile you from your land. And this is basically the story of prophecy. You've strayed. I send a prophet. The prophet warns you, come back to the straight and narrow. Maybe you did for a little while, then you strayed. I sent a second prophet. The second prophet did the same thing, warned you. You live only conditionally on this land. If you want to be safe and secure, you'd better follow the commandments. You listened for a while, then you didn't listen. I sent a third prophet, and a fourth, and a fifth. There are 15 books of the Bible named for prophets. So God was patient the logic of conditionality was promulgated. This is how you maintain. But God is patient. God is willing to try again and again and again. And then God's patience ran out, and he exiled us from our land. The consequences of the conditional covenant. Think about the people in the land in Babylonia. We're here because of our own sins. We're going to have to repent. Deuteronomy talks about if you repent. Underlying all of those contingencies of the historical process is the idea of the absolute promise of the land. That promise, no matter how deep into exile the people live, let's speculate. Even if they live in exile for 2,000 years, tongue-in-cheek with speculation, the Jews lived without a land of their own for 2,000 years. What are the factors that led them still to want to return there? The unconditional promise. What does history have to do with, I give you this land forever? Forever means whatever happens in the meantime, that forever promise, that's what forever means. It's not contingent on anything. So that notice how fascinating this kind of dialectic is. Does our life on the land depend on our actions? Yes. Does our life on the land depend on our actions? No. In the long run, no. No matter how long we're off the land, we're coming back. How do I know what factors make that possible? How do I know in the 14th century that when the steamboat and the telegraph is invented, the conditions for return to the land are beginning to emerge? So that it doesn't matter for how long. So the Bible has developed here a theory of history which both depends upon behavior, ethics, and doesn't. So that the Bible has laid a foundation. I think we can understand the vicissitudes of the Jewish view of the relationship between Jewish people and land in just this way. For our sins, we were exiled from the land. And Deuteronomy talks about, if you repent, I will bring you back. That is one of the conditions for return. And there was an interdiction imposed by the rabbis. We are not allowed on our own to go back and take possession of the land as a national entity. Jews always lived there. We have to wait until the term of our punishment is up and for God to say, this is the time. Okay? And it was a challenge to early Zionists. How can I overcome that notion that it's a violation, it's an avera, it's a sin to go up on our own to create a national entity? We have to wait. And Orthodox rabbis who became Zionists struggled to find passages in the Torah that justified Orthodox-minded Jews to go back. One of them found a passage which says God will return to his thousands and his 10,000s. Aha. This passage is suggesting that first we have to get thousands and 10,000s there, and then God will return. The process, the chronology, is not necessarily God first, then us. That chronology is we first, then God. And God will affirm that we have gone. So that was an attempt by religious Zionists to find a way to get the people out of the danger of Eastern Europe. It's such a fascinating process based upon biblical passages like these. Russell?
Yeah, so there's a problem here and then earlier in the previous
go. I mean, we talk about the twice promised land. And the Muslims don't have to look to that passage to find grounds of their own. That Muhammad had a night flight to Jerusalem and was taken up to heaven at the Temple Mount is a way of saying we have a right to this land. Something quite fundamental happened there. So, right. In my view, we could take a piece of paper and draw a line down the center, and then mark the right to the land of the Jews and of the Muslims, and we would come up with parallel columns. That is a way of reaching undecidability. So to me, let's put aside all of this and deal with the situation on the ground. Do we want a war every 3 years? That's what it's been the last 15 years. Or should we find a way that serves both the Palestinians and the Jews? Forget who got there first. We got there first. No, we got there first. Archaeology shows we got there first. This is all futile in my view, because there are claims to this land for a variety of peoples. Joe, did you have a question or comment?
I was just thinking that at the time, at the biblical time, land was, you could consider land a metaphor. Land was how you were protected, and land is how you got sustenance. But today, it may no longer be the only mode of sustenance and protection. Land may not be able to protect you. Think of satellites or something coming out of the sky, and it's not the only mode of sustenance. So I'm wondering if there's anywhere in Jewish literature where we learn about our actions and how it creates alienation from ourselves, from our groups, from whatever, as opposed to replace the land with the sustenance and the protection that we need. And I wonder if land was just a biblical metaphor because that's the only thing that existed at the time. But the future is more about how we have to behave to have protection and sustenance, even if it's not the land. And therefore, the enigma of having to share the land maybe goes away, because you get your sustenance and your protection not from exclusivity in the land, but from your behavior that can coexist with others' behavior.
Right, and so, I mean,
A little spiritual, but.
so Joe is wondering whether or not if we have as a sort of premise for our musings the need for protection and for sustenance, to what degree is land necessary for that? Can't there be other ways, such as modes of living? And in a certain way, this is part of what we might call the theoretical foundations of diaspora. George Steiner has an essay, or maybe it's a book, Our Land, the Text. So that the text now serves the function that the land did. After all, one of the virtues of land is that it gives material reality to a group, to a people. So in the diaspora, what holds us together? What gives us Jewish life? And Steiner's view is the analog to the land is the text itself. And in medieval Europe, this worked pretty darn well. I mean, there was a hierarchy of rabbis, community rabbis. The top community rabbi looked to somebody at a higher level, and by and large, they lived a unified Jewish life. So Joseph Caro pens in like 1580 the Shulchan Aruch, which means a prepared table, as if Jewish law can be analogized to a set table. You put the salad fork here, you put the main fork here, the knife doesn't go here, the knife goes here, and the spoon, the wine glass, the water glass. The set table follows a pattern, and Jewish law is analogous to that pattern. And so he writes a Shulchan Aruch, and it's organized by the hours of the day. What do I do in the morning, and so on in the evening. a guy whose name is Moses Isserles wrote a compendium to bring the Shulchan Aruch to Eastern European Jewry. And so he said, yes, that works for us too, but I have to add particular customs of Eastern European Jewry for the coherence of that group. And he called his commentary the mapa, the tablecloth. Isn't that great? The set table and the tablecloth. So there were patterns of unifying the people in the diaspora, say through the system of law. Why did Maimonides write the Mishnah Torah? In order to give a unifying factor for all Jews. Of course, it was intellectually oriented, and some of the other rabbis found it to be overly philosophical, but nevertheless. So Joe is making an interesting point here, but we have to recognize that land is a way of organizing, giving identity, particularity to a group. Yeah. Lynn?
This comment is kind of going back to what Eddie was saying about the difference in Israeli life and the Arab, places the Arab, places where the Arabs habitate in Israel and from Israel. Over 30 years ago was my first and only time I went to Israel, and the tour person was an Israeli, and he also was high up in the army, and he lived in Israel. His name is Duran. And I noticed, of course, he showed us the difference in the green where the Israelites habitat the land, and the barren nothing of where the Arabs. And this leads me to what you said about Zionism and Gordon. And maybe at the time, 20 years before I got there, 50 years ago, let's say, that they took to what Gordon said, and they took the land of Israel,
Mhm.
and they bettered it as much as they possibly could by starting from the land up.
Mhm.
It was like an irrigation system,
Right.
which, was unknown how to do, and they did that, and everything became green, and they were able to lay crops, and this is what you were saying about Zionism, or Gordon, that you have to take care of the land,
Mhm.
and it comes from the people up to God. And there was a stark contrast.
Mhm.
And I do remember one other thing was the land that Israel, I shouldn't say that. I don't know exactly how they habitated, or what you would call it, the Arab quarters or the Israeli part. But the Israelites took a lot of time, maybe when they started with the land, to uncover the archaeology and the history. And you would say this site was not even known until we came, and then they found it, refurbished it. So I think what Eddie had seen is what I saw 30 years ago, and I think I'm just connecting it to the Zionist movement
Yeah.
of caring for the land.
Mhm. So I want to respond to that. So, two things. One, nobody can doubt the enormous accomplishment of Zionism. We just can't doubt that achievement in so many ways. What that doesn't imply, though, it seems to me, is that other indigenous cultures are of lesser quality. Lynn, one of the first things you said there was you described the Bedouin culture as barren and empty. Now, those are very loaded words. I don't think the Bedouins would think that their culture is empty. They undoubtedly think of it as very full. Food laws, marriage laws, inheritance laws. Any group, any culture that lives down through time has to have settled ways of doing things, which we call culture. And it may not be our culture, but I don't think we can call it barren until we actually live it from the inside. So,
I was just contrasting the difference. I'm not
Huns and Arabs lived on that land for centuries. Of course, they were a backwater element of the Ottoman Empire. They did not have their own indigenous, they may have had some kind of self-government, but there was nothing like a state. But they flourished on that land in their own way. I'm sure they have a view of the land. They have a view of their culture. So I'm very reluctant myself to make any comparative judgments because, you know, it's so easy to celebrate what we have. You know, the joke about the grandmother pushing the young infant granddaughter down the street, and she runs into a friend, and the friend says, "Oh, that's such a beautiful baby," and she says, "Oh, you should see the pictures." I mean, our children, our babies are, let's face it, the most beautiful, the choicest that ever existed. Is that an accident? I mean, is it true? Of course, our own is precious to us, but that doesn't mean that in objective terms, this is the most beautiful X or Y. I'm just reluctant to make comparative judgments at all because we don't understand.
I just want to say about the Bedouins. Yes, if you go to Beersheba and you see the green oasis that the Jews made, but the Bedouins are nomads. They don't want to settle a certain place. They want to go with their camels or whatever where it's crazy. So they are, it's a different mindset.
There you go.
I don't think that it's fair to say that they are inferior. They are just different. And I think that when you look at the Arabs, they did the terrazos and all those things. It's a different relationship than the Zionistic idea of what a land is.
No, I think that's well said. I agree with that. I mean, we can celebrate what the Zionists did. It was quite a miraculous set of accomplishments, no doubt. Malcolm, and then...
Are we obliged in striving to become holy, are we obliged through the scripture or by God to return to Israel? Are we not fulfilled? Can we not achieve holiness unless we return to Israel?
Right, no, that's a good point. I think that the Bible, maybe I'm wrong about this, now that I think about it, maybe I am. I mean, the Bible has a heavy land of Israel bias, but as I was formulating what I just said, I mean, after all, the book of Esther, when you think about the book of Esther, this is a kind of a manual for how to survive in the exile. Because Esther and Mordecai find a way to survive and to thrive. So that one could say the book of Esther recognizes the power, that's not the right word, the integrity, the value, of something like that, of exilic living, especially the necessity of coming to terms with it. So Ecclesiastes, you know, some of the late wisdom books have no connection to the land whatsoever. They're wisdom books, and you think of wisdom as universal. Land orientation is particular. So I would say that the Bible makes possible, considering the value, the possibility of diaspora living, whereas much of the narrative is very land-oriented. So, you know, I mean, you raise an interesting point here, and I'm thinking about this, and we'll continue to think about it. What are the theoretical foundations? What are the Jewish foundations for the validity of life in the diaspora? So, look, one could make a distinction between diaspora and exile. the very notion of exile suggests aberration, pathology. Exile means a bad place, so that the very notion of exile is an Israel-centered, land of Israel ideology. If you live outside the land, you are living an unnatural Jewish life by definition. If we replace the word exile with diaspora, which is a much more descriptive and not an evaluative term. By definition, exile means negative. Diaspora just means we don't live in the land of Israel. And what are the theoretical foundations, the Jewish foundations for diaspora living? I mean, in a way, Joe was asking that question too. Certainly the wisdom books of the Bible. Jeremiah says, Jeremiah chapter 30, 29 or 30, when you get to the Babylonian exile, live there. Create families, build cities, pray for the well-being of the government. So Jeremiah is really laying some foundations for the normalization of exilic life. Oh, I'd love to find that passage.
Talmud came out of it.
I'm sorry?
Talmud came out of exile.
Yeah.
The Talmud.
Good. So, you know, a small percentage of Babylonian Jews returned when King Cyrus said it's time to go back. And as Margie just says, the Babylonian Jews, so a few return, many stay there, and create Babylonian Jewish culture, which existed until the 11th century of the Common Era. That's a millennium and a half. So that's a great example of flourishing in the exile. There are two Talmuds, the Babylonian and the Palestinian. The Palestinian Talmud has a much smaller reputation and impact than the Babylonian Talmud. Namely, it's the Babylonian Jewish community. Maimonides himself, I think, tried to restore the prestige of the Palestinian Talmud, but just that. So, you know, we have the Mishnaic scholars, we have the Talmudic, and then we have the Gaonim, which are the geniuses, the giants of the Babylonian culture. So, you know, I think if we wanted to put together a theology, maybe just a theory of diaspora living, can we find a way to assert the status of diaspora Judaism equal to the status of land of Israel? Something to think about, really is. Yeah. Yeah. So in a way, Judaism is I was going to say bipolar. Two different focal points. There's the land of Israel and there's the diaspora. And both have had a huge impact on the continuity of Judaism, the flourishing of its culture in a variety of places. You know what?
Yeah.
I have to be somewhere at 6. So let's stop. And next week I want to continue with this and especially deal with a couple of more questions. One is the unique status of the land, and the Torah has some things to say about that. And the whole notion, the prophetic notion of return to the land, and what that means and what lays the foundations for it. So we'll continue next week. Shabbat Shalom.
Two things.
When you pull back, okay.
jump in, Eddie, because I have to take off like right away. But if that's okay. It's gonna be real quick, super quick, because I gotta go change clothes and go to play baseball.
Ooh.
Yeah. I have to go to camp. I have to get to camp like right away, so I have to.
He's shotgun.
These are two very short things.
Mine is 1 sentence.
Okay, go ahead.
See, it's much easier to be Jew in America than Israel. If you're a
Well,
former conservative.
But I think the case could be
If you're a
made,
former
look,
conservative, I think so.
The community in New York City is fundamentally a sociological phenomenon. The Jews gathering and flourishing. Does it capture the religious, the covenantal, even the ethical imperatives incumbent upon a people? I think if we described it sociologically, we would have accomplished knowing it. So yes, the New York Jews have succeeded wonderfully, but I think the whole issue of building a scaffolding with different components, that ethics matters, and it just doesn't matter only that I want to be kind to you and me, but my destiny, the destiny of the people depends upon it. That raises the quality, the importance of ethics, the whole idea of holiness. That I would say that the holy brings God into the picture here. The holiness of the land, the holy aspirations of the people, give it a kind of valence that New York really doesn't feel as a collective. So that, the question is, what are the attributes, what are the qualities of your collective? And the more qualities you can gather, the sturdier, the more durable, the more self-identifying, which is not to diminish the achievements of Cleveland Jewish culture, but my God, we raise $35 million a year to support our institution. Wow. I mean, that's an accomplishment. But I don't know that it gathers all the attributes that the Torah is trying to build for the land of Israel. I might be wrong about
That's
that.
biblical God, who's totally controlling all the parts, all the chess pieces of Jewish life at the time. This is a God most people even believe in anymore, to that extent, or want to believe.
So to me, the question is not so much the Bible's God, let's call it personal God, as the role of a transcendent reality that transcends the customs and ceremonies of daily living. Do we want to attach ourselves to a realm that is constant, that never dies, is not subject to the changes in cultures and society? Who was it? Leonard Feuerbach, in his wonderful book, The Essence of Christianity. Yeah, let's see. All anthropology is something about we turn our best attributes over to God. I'm knowledgeable, God is fully knowledgeable. I'm good, God is fully good. And we've projected our virtues out on the cosmos and in a way created a smaller self. Feuerbach was asking for the reverse. Let's take those attributes from God and say they're really human attributes, and we can live a completely fully life. So Feuerbach, in a way, eliminates that transcendent realm. To me, the issue of God is everything reducible to customs and ceremonies? This is the way we do it. Or is there such a thing as the good, capital G? That is there some notion of the best life? Is there some reality of holiness? Am I better off in some way by connecting myself to the holy possibilities of life? And I can do that only if I believe that that kind of life exists.
Exactly.
I don't know. Yeah, just something like that.
So we've taken over and talked to you.
Oh.
So they're giving me their number. No, I just wanted to know Jackie.
Oh, we
You have plans.
yeah, we have plans before. But we'd love to get together on another basis.
I like the repartee back and forth, and I have to say, my favorite quote by Rabbi Sachs is, biblical ethics is a prolonged tutorial in role reversal. I love that idea that you have to think like a Palestinian to try to understand.
Yeah.
Your thing of triads
And I'll let you guys
is the solution, I think. Actually,
Love your pendant.
the list, the two-part list you made,
Where'd you get it?
plus the triads.
The Nova Fest.
If you could identify all
From a
those
mother
triads and make those
Daughter
lists.
survived only
think-
because you
Oh,
probably
the
heard
list
about
on a
it.
piece of
Noah
paper.
was
You went, yeah, the Islam and Judaism, which is one of many lists, and two of many triads. If you put all those down, there's probably a resolution.
played dead.
There's a way to resolve
And
it
only
all.
4 survived.
If you satisfy each of the triads, and by the way, the one you just mentioned,
Yeah,
it sounds like he
and
took
her two closest
this
friends.
triad
This is a
and just
terrible
flipped it,
story.
sort of made that intrinsic in
The mother's
those
daughter,
top two.
Secularized.
Two things these are quick. I have to go play baseball in Canton. I'm gonna change in the midterm.
they've been at
My son told me about a new form of tennis. It's called silent tennis. It's the same as regular tennis without the racket.
It's like handball.
we met these
No,
people.
without the
So you were
racket.
just there. Did they
Without
take,
the
did you
racket.
go to the sites?
Isn't that great? Isn't that great? And
And
this just happened a couple hours ago. You can look at it later. I was invited to be one of 2 catchers on the Cleveland team for this.
How nice is that?
That- it's-
Is this
woman who
you?
went.
No.
One who
These are
survived
pictures from the site, although I
shelter.
did substitute one of me at League
Yeah.
Park, because League Park is one of the places, but yeah, you have to take a look at this.
I will definitely take a look
This,
at it.
But
I'm very honored to be considered.
How is that?
you know,
You
it's
know,
not
and-
close to.
Yeah,
That settlement area?
What you went through.
Your artistic
I know.
family.
Yes.
Is it
That was
settlement?
what, 6, 8?
No.
I was yeah, closer to 8. So,
And you're back.
and still working at it. I'm not 100% yet.
Well, but
I'll-
look at
I
this.
think at age 80, I'll probably reach 100%. I just hit 70 last month, so.
Nice.
Okay.
Keep it up, keep it
Yeah,
up.
I'm working on it.
All right,
Okay,
we'll
take care.
talk soon.
Good
Yeah,
seeing you again.
You're talking Greek or whatever. Yeah, I don't understand any of that. I don't understand baseball. I just know you hit a ball. There's from what Mark was asking, there's a quote I know I read, but I can't remember who wrote it. And I think it was a Sephardic rabbi that said, you know, how in the end of the Haggadah you say next year in Jerusalem. And one of the rabbis' commentaries that I read said, some people, even in Jerusalem, will never be in Jerusalem, meaning, you know, it's more than just the geographical site. So,
And that was Joe's point in a way too.
Yeah.
A way of living.
yeah. So I didn't want to say it because I don't remember who wrote it. So, but I do recall reading it because I always felt like, do we have to live there? And after I visited Israel and I was with my family, I was like, yes, it's a lot easier to be a Jew in Israel as it is right now. Although I must admit that there is very little tolerance to non-Orthodox Jews, you know, and that is to me, it's sad because Israel should be known for embracing and loving the Jewish people no matter what. But
Nice theory. Nice theory. together and they're gonna be disagreements.
My
about how
family is
to do it.
actually they're moving out of Bet Shemesh because it's become way too orthodox, even for them. Because there's a lot of Haredi, not a Haredi. I forgot. No, it's not even the Sephardic side. It's on the Ashkenazi side that they're moving in there a lot. So and they're very judgmental. They're throwing stones at people and stuff like that. I'm like, my brother's like, listen, I'm Orthodox. I observe the commandments, but they want me to do it in the most radical way that I'm not even gonna.
Well, I mean, the great danger there is that as it becomes more and more super Orthodox, the diaspora community, especially in America, will find itself more and more alienated from that group. And if you lose American Jewry, that's going to be a very big problem for Israel.
Yeah.
Because American Jewry, has a lot of clout in the Congress and so on. So it'll become just another isolated state in the Middle East, and it will be all the more vulnerable. So the alienation factor is, I suppose it's inevitable, not only in terms of Orthodox, but in terms of the Levantanization.
Yeah.
It'll become embedded in the Middle East. What will its origins be? Not Western Europe, not America, but Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and American Jews will lose interest.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to happen. That's why
I
the ongoing
believe so.
crisis is so important. Because if you create a crisis mentality, then American Jews are going to be interested. And I think that Netanyahu has some interest in maintaining the crisis, not only for his own purposes, but for this as well. Anyhow, good.
So look for that quote. Yeah, right. All right. Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. Take care.
To lower the conversation, but we need to talk baseball.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So I got our tickets for the Crushers, our usual, right, first section after the third base dugout. Would that work? I haven't been to Canal Park since you, Sue, and I went like 7 years ago. So shall I buy that same kind of seat?
Oh, of course.
Okay.
Oh, sure.
I mean, you like that?
Oh, I
You get
like
to kind of look in.
Right. First base is always comparable.
Yeah.
So, whenever,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Okay.
That's
Yep.
good. So, I have in my calendar our
Right.
dates.
The 30th of June, you and I are going to Avon in the afternoon. Right, on the last day of the existence of this temple. Are we allowed to do that?
Boy, oh boy, I'll sneak out. Great. Oh, good. And you'll just let me know what it
Right.
is.
The Pecos family is